Hello juniors, and welcome back to Computer Systems and Programming. Today we're going to be going over the Project 1 or Hangman, and this will be the full walkthrough video. So I have two things set up here. I have my desktop and I also have a document camera. So I'll use the document camera for taking notes on the different variables that we're going to have to make and to draw out some things for you. And then I'll just use my regular desktop to show you the code that we're going to be doing. We're going to do this in a process. So we know our objective already. If you've read the activity prompt, it is to make a hangman game. And so I've made a flowchart for our algorithm. So I'll show you the algorithm in text later, but for right now, I'm going to go through this flowchart that will kind of walk you through the algorithm that we have. If you want to look at the algorithm along the way, it's on the activity prompt in the first couple of steps. So the first step in our algorithm is to create our functions. So to create functions in Python, this picture illustrates what it looks like. So you always have your defining keyword, you have the name of the function. Right now this template one is called do something, and then you have the parentheses and the colon. So then when you indent, everything that's indented, similar to if statements and loops, that's all inside of the function. So this first line is what it wants it to do, and then at the end of a function you have a return value, or what you're going to return from the function. So we have three different types of functions we have to make for our program, and I'll go through them right now. The first one is pick random word. So the function, we're going to define it, then we're going to name it pick random word, put our parentheses, and if you remember, parentheses are where parameters go. We don't have any parameters, so it's just empty, and then we have our colon. And then so on this first line, I'll write what it is this function is going to do, and then on the second line, I'll write what it is returning. So this function is selecting a word from a list in a text file. So it's trying to pick a random word from a list in a text file. This is because we need an actual word to play the game, so the computer is, in a sense, generating a word for us. Only it's just picking from a long list of words. And then it'll return that word as a string that we can then apply to variables and stuff. The next function is ask user for next letter. If you've noticed, these names are very explanatory of what it's doing. So the first one, pick random word, it is quite literally picking a random word. In this one, it is quite literally asking the user for the next letter. Similar how we asked the user for the next like rock, paper, or scissors, then we're doing the same thing but with letter. So we're going to define it, put its name, parentheses, there's no parameters, and then a colon. And then what we're going to do in this function is get input from user, and then we're going to return the guessed letter. So the input is going to be a letter, and then we'll return that to wherever this function was called. The last function we have to do is generate word string. So we're gonna this one isn't quite as explanatory just because it doesn't quite make sense yet, because you don't think of it. So we're gonna define it, generate word string, and put our parentheses and colon, and then what this is going to do is make a string of correct letters guessed. So if I go over to the document camera, when we're playing hangman, let me just draw the hangman game here. We always have where the person is going to be hung, and then we have the spot for all the letters, whatever the amount of letters there are. We need a way to generate this into a text format. So if there's not a correct answer, like we don't have any words, then it should just display, or it should make a string of a bunch of underscores. Otherwise, if we know what the letter is, or we've guessed it correctly already, we can have the letter show up instead of the underscore. So, if I go back to my computer, oops. So it's going to make a string of either the correct letters or the or underscores for the letters we haven't guessed yet, and then it's going to return that string that we can then print out to the user. So those are the three functions we'll be using throughout it. So then these, like I've explained in Fall Cohort, functions are small programs that we can then call later. So we have those set up, and then later we'll call them and be like, hey, I want you to do that thing, and then it'll do it, and it'll return whatever we want. So the next step in our program is to make a text file. So the text file will hold all those random words that we have, but we still have to make that and tell it where to find it. So we'll create that later. Then we have to make sure we're working in the main module. We'll do this with a conditional statement, an if-else statement. So we're just going to say if we are in the main module, we will continue. This is just a good practice of coding while in Python to make sure that you're working, that your code stays clean, I guess. It's very complicated what this one if statement does, but you'll see later. Then we have to create our variables. So there's going to be a couple different types of variables we have. And here's just a little image that shows you what variables like kind of do. Variables are like similar to a bucket, and they just hold that data, hold that information. So if we add on our specific variables in here, we're going to have a variable named word, and what it's going to hold is the word the computer picked from the list. So that is our word to be guessed, but we're just going to call it word because that's the word that the computer picked. That's all it is. The next one we're going to have is letters to guess. So we're going to break up that word into its letters so that when we go to search, like we can say, okay, is this, when the user guesses a letter, we can say, is this letter in this group of letters? Otherwise, if it's not, then that's incorrect. So this is just a list of all the letters that the word has. The next thing, we have correct letters guessed. So this is another, they're not called lists, they're called sets. So it's another set of data. This is all this set will hold all the letters that have already been guessed correctly. So if A was in the in our word and we guessed it correctly, it will go into this set so that we know that we've already guessed it and they can't guess it again. Then we have incorrect letters guessed. So this will hold all the letters guessed incorrectly. Again, this is just so we know that, so they won't guess the same letter over and over. So then we'll have another variable for number of guesses, because so the variable is num guesses and the number of times the user guessed. So this is because we'll want to check how many times they've guessed, because after a certain amount of times they lose. That's how it works. If you guess 6 times, you lose in Hangman. So that was the end of our variables. Now we have to welcome the user. So we're just going to make a print statement. I put this image of a printer because it's pretty straightforward. You're just going to print welcome. You're going to say, hello, welcome to play my game. Here's the rules, da 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 da. It's just to introduce them to the game so it doesn't just start off. Then we're going to create a loop. This will loop each guess of the letters. So we'll say, okay, you guessed, is it correct, incorrect, or you already did it, or that was a repeat word or repeat letter, and then we'll loop that process over and over, similar as how we had a loop for rock, paper, scissors. We said, okay, we're going to loop each round saying so that the user can keep guessing rock, paper, or scissors. Now we're going to loop just the guessing of the letter in hangman. So then while inside of that loop, we're going to have the user guess a letter. So they'll just input a letter. Then we'll have the different outcomes. So one outcome of the guess is that they're correct. The other is that they're incorrect. The last is that they already guessed that letter. And then each of those different conditions will lead to a different outcome. So if you think about this first diamond right here, it's saying if we say if they guess correctly, then it's going to do this. If they guess incorrectly, then it's going to do this. And then if all else fails, then it'll do this. So that's what ours is going to look like similarly. Then we're going to have the end of the turn print statement. So how many turns are left, and we're going to like print out something that lets them know how many turns are left and what letters are correct. And then we'll have the end of game print statements, which will just be a conditional letting them know if they won or they lost. That's all that will do. So I'll be referring to this flow chart along the way.